Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through a heavy wooden door. Its iron hinges groaning just enough to remind you that silence here is never truly silent. The air inside the monastery feels cool and faintly damp, like stone that has been holding secrets for centuries. You shuffle forward on worn flagstones, and somewhere in the distance, a bell begins to toll. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. It's the kind of place where even your thoughts feel like they should whisper. And honestly, if you had to live here on their schedule, waking up in the middle of the night over and over again, you probably wouldn't survive a week, maybe not even 2 days, especially if you're used to snoozing alarms like a modern-day champion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, still adjusting to the dim glow of flickering candles when the bell rings again. It's not just a sound, it's a command. In a medieval monastery, bells don't politely suggest anything. They dictate your entire existence. You don't wake up when you feel rested. You wake up when the bell tells you. You eat when the bell allows you. And yes, you sleep, if you can call it that, when the bell permits. The first thing you notice is how early actually is. We're talking about a time when most modern people would still be negotiating with their alarm clock, hitting snooze for the 3rd time. Here, though, there is no snooze button. The bell cuts through the darkness for the night office, often called matins, somewhere around what you would think of as the dead of night. You're not easing into your morning. You're being pulled out of sleep like a reluctant ghost. You wrap your cloak tighter as you follow the other monks through narrow corridors. No one speaks. They don't need to. Everyone knows where to go because they've done this every single day, every single night. The rhythm is relentless. Prayer, work, study, more prayer, and then in fragments, sleep. This isn't one long, cozy stretch of 8 hours, not even close. Instead, sleep is broken into pieces, like a loaf of bread rationed carefully so it lasts. A few hours here, a short rest there, and then ring the bell calls you back again. Historians often point to the widespread use of canonical hours in medieval monasteries as a defining feature of monastic life. These structured prayer times, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, create a cycle that never really stops. It's like living inside a clock, except the clock controls you, not the other way around. And here's something a little unexpected. Many monks didn't actually consider uninterrupted sleep to be ideal. In fact, segmented sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, was quite normal in medieval Europe, not just in monasteries. People outside the monastery often had a first sleep and a second sleep, with a quiet period in between. So in a strange way, the monks weren't entirely unusual. They were just taking it to an extreme level. You shuffle into the chapel, the cold stone pressing through the thin soles of your sandals. If you've ever complained about stepping on a cold tile floor at night, congratulations, you would absolutely hate it here. There's no heated flooring, no fluffy socks, and definitely no just 5 more minutes. The chanting begins, low and steady, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. It's almost hypnotic, like the building itself is breathing. And yet, your body is still halfway asleep. Your eyelids feel heavy, your thoughts drift, and you catch yourself wondering how anyone manages to stay awake through this night after night. Apparently, not everyone did. There are records, quiet, slightly judgmental records, of monks who nodded off during prayers. You can almost picture it, a row of solemn figures, and then one poor soul gently swaying, eyes closing, perhaps jerking awake just in time to pretend they were deeply contemplative. If you've ever pretended to be focused in a meeting while internally dreaming about food, you already understand the technique. Some monasteries even had specific ways to deal with this: a gentle nudge, a stern look, or in stricter communities, small penalties for those who couldn't keep their eyes open. Nothing too dramatic. This is still a PG-13 kind of place, but enough to make you think twice about drifting off mid-chant. What's fascinating is that the monks themselves were deeply aware of the tension between the body's need for rest and the soul's call to devotion. They wrote about it, they debated it, They worried about it. Sleep wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a spiritual issue. Too much sleep? That could be seen as laziness, even a gateway to sin. Too little sleep? Well, that might leave you too exhausted to pray properly, which is kind of the whole point of being here. And this is where the quiet arguments begin. Not loud shouting matches, but ongoing disagreements, whispered in cloisters and written in margins. How much sleep is enough? When should it happen? Should you allow a short nap during the day? Historians are still debating the extent to which these disagreements shaped different monastic communities. Some sources suggest a surprising level of flexibility, while others paint a picture of strict uniformity. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in between, like a monk trying to balance on the edge between sleep and wakefulness. You glance around the chapel again, noticing how the candlelight flickers across tired faces. No one looks particularly well rested. And yet there's a strange calm here, a sense that this exhaustion is shared, almost accepted. The bell will ring again soon. It always does. And as you stand there swaying just slightly with the rhythm of the chant, you begin to realize something. In this world, sleep is not a private comfort. It's a carefully negotiated privilege, one that every monk, including you now, must constantly justify. Section 2. You don't remember exactly when you lay down, only that it felt far too soon after the last bell, and somehow not soon enough. The straw mattress beneath you rustles as you shift, each movement sounding louder than it should in the shared dormitory. Around you, rows of monks lie in near-perfect stillness, wrapped in rough woolen blankets that feel more symbolic than comfortable. If you've ever complained about your pillow being slightly off, you would absolutely file a formal complaint with the medieval universe at this point. The darkness here isn't complete. A faint glow leaks in from a distant candle left burning in the corridor, just enough to outline the beams of the ceiling above you. You stare at them for a moment, trying to convince your body that yes, this is sleep time, even though your brain is still halfway stuck in the chanting from earlier. It's a bit like trying to fall asleep after scrolling your phone too long, except instead of blue light, it's Gregorian echoes stuck in your head. Eventually, you drift, and then, far too quickly, the bell. It cuts through your sleep like a knife through soft bread. Not loud, not chaotic, just inevitable. You blink awake, disoriented, unsure if you slept for hours or minutes. This is the rhythm now. Sleep, wake, pray, repeat. No long stretch of rest, no luxurious sinking into dreams, just fragments. This kind of sleep pattern, often called segmented sleep, wasn't just a monastic quirk. In medieval Europe, many people naturally slept in two phases, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a quiet waking period in between. But here in the monastery, that idea has been refined into something almost mechanical. Your rest is no longer guided by your body, it's scheduled by bells. You sit up slowly, trying not to disturb the monk beside you, who, judging by the soft but persistent snoring, is having a much more committed relationship with sleep than the rest of you. It's not aggressive snoring, more like a gentle rhythmic hum, but still, in a room this quiet, it might as well be a full concert. You swing your feet onto the cold floor again. Yes, still cold, always cold. The kind of cold that makes you question every life decision that led you here, including the one where you followed a mysterious narrator into a medieval monastery in the first place. As you shuffle out with the others, you begin to notice something subtle. Not everyone wakes the same way. Some monks rise immediately, alert and composed, as if they've trained their bodies to obey without hesitation. Others move more slowly, blinking, rubbing their eyes, clearly negotiating with reality. And then there are the experts, the ones who have mastered the art of micro-rest. You spot one monk lingering just a fraction of a second longer on his mattress, eyes closed, squeezing out every possible moment of sleep before standing. It's a skill, really. If modern people are masters of the snooze button, these monks are pioneers of the pre-bell denial phase. There are even whispers, quiet, slightly amused whispers, about monks who can fall asleep almost instantly between duties. A few minutes here, a few minutes there, like squirrels storing nuts, except the nuts are naps. It's not officially encouraged, of course, but it's also not entirely uncommon. You make your way back to the chapel, the air feeling even colder now, as if the night itself is resisting the idea of morning. The chanting begins again, and you try to follow along, but your mind drifts. You think about how strange this all is. In your world, sleep is something you try to maximize, track with apps, optimize with routines, maybe even brag about if you get a full 8 hours. Here, it's something to be carefully limited, structured, even questioned. There's a deeper belief at play that too much comfort can dull the spirit, that a certain level of physical discomfort, yes, including interrupted sleep, can sharpen devotion. It's not about suffering for its own sake, but about discipline. At least, that's the idea. Of course, not everyone agrees on how far that should go. Some monastic communities lean towards stricter interpretations, reducing sleep to the bare minimum. Others allowed slightly longer rest periods, recognizing that a completely exhausted monk is not exactly the picture of spiritual focus. After all, it's hard to contemplate eternal truths when you're fighting the overwhelming urge to nap face first into a psalter. Historians are still debating the extent to which these variations were officially sanctioned or simply evolved over time. Written rules suggest one thing, but daily practice often tells a more flexible story, one shaped by human limits, and those limits are very real. As the chanting continues, you feel your head dip, just slightly. You catch yourself, straighten up, and glance sideways, half expecting a disapproving look. Instead, you notice something comforting. You're not the only one. A monk 2 rows ahead sways gently, eyes half closed, his voice still somehow keeping pace with the chant. It's almost impressive, like he's developed a kind of sleep prayer hybrid mode. If this were a modern setting, you'd probably assume he was multitasking. Here, it's just survival. There's even a curious, lesser-known detail tucked away in some accounts. In certain monasteries, the arrangement of sleeping quarters and the timing of prayers were adjusted slightly during different times of the year, not just for daylight, but for human endurance. It wasn't always about rigid perfection. Sometimes it was about making the system sustainable. Still, the ideal remained demanding. You shift your weight again, trying to stay present. The candlelight flickers, shadows stretching and shrinking along the stone walls. The voices rise and fall in unison, a steady current carrying you along even as your body resists. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet thought forms. This isn't just about when you sleep, it's about who decides. Here, it's not you. The bell decides, the rule decides, the rhythm of centuries decides. You're just following. As the final notes of the chant fade, you feel a strange mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that this segment is over. Anticipation of what comes next. Work, more prayer, maybe, if you're lucky, another brief encounter with that elusive thing called rest. But already you can sense it, this fragmented sleep, this constant interruption. It's not just a schedule. It's the beginning of an argument. A quiet one, yes, but persistent. And it's about to get much more interesting. Section 3. You step out of the chapel with the others, the final echoes of chanting still clinging to your ears like a melody that refuses to fade. The sky outside is beginning to soften, just barely, hinting at dawn, though your body insists it's still very much the middle of the night. You walk slowly across the courtyard, your sandals brushing against damp stone, and for a moment, you imagine how nice it would be to simply lie down right there and let the cold ground cradle you back to sleep. Not ideal, but honestly at this point, you're not picky. Instead, you follow the line of monks toward the refectory, where a modest meal awaits. It's quiet, of course. Meals here are often taken in silence, sometimes accompanied by a reading. You sit, hands folded, trying to look as composed as everyone else, even though internally you're calculating how many minutes of sleep you might salvage later. Spoiler, not many. As the meal progresses, simple bread, maybe a bit of broth, you begin to notice something unusual, a subtle tension, not visible at first glance, but present in the way a few monks exchange brief looks, or how one clears his throat just a little louder than necessary. It starts innocently enough. A monk, older, with a calm but slightly weary expression, mentions, almost casually, the idea of a short rest after the midday meal. Not a long sleep, he clarifies. Just a brief pause. A moment to restore the body so that the afternoon prayers can be approached with clarity rather than, well, mild hallucination. You nearly perk up at the suggestion. A nap? In this place? That sounds like discovering a secret level in a game you thought only had hard mode. But the reaction is mixed. Another monk, sitting across from him, lifts his head slightly, his expression composed but firm. He gently reminds the table that excessive rest can lead to spiritual laxity. The body, he suggests, should not be indulged too freely. There's a careful tone to his voice, but the message is clear. Naps are suspicious. And just like that, you've stumbled into it. The great understated debate of medieval monastic life. Should monks nap? It sounds almost trivial, like arguing over whether it's okay to hit snooze one more time. But here, it carries real weight, because every decision about the body is also a decision about the soul. The idea of a midday rest, sometimes referred to in later periods as a siesta, wasn't entirely unheard of, especially in warmer climates. In fact, some monastic communities did allow a brief rest after the main meal, particularly during the summer months when the heat made afternoon work more difficult. But not everyone agreed this was appropriate. For stricter interpretations of monastic discipline, sleep during the day could be seen as a slippery slope. First, a short nap, then perhaps a longer one. And before you know it, you're drifting into comfort, losing the sharp edge of vigilance that monastic life is meant to cultivate. It's a bit like telling yourself you'll just watch one episode before bed, and suddenly it's 3 a.m. and you're questioning your life choices. The monks, it seems, understood this danger all too well, just without the streaming services. You take a small bite of bread, trying to look neutral, as if you're not internally rooting for Team Nap. Around you, the discussion continues, still polite, still restrained, but definitely a discussion. One monk points out that even the most dedicated among them are still human. That fatigue can dull the mind, making prayer less focused, less sincere. A brief rest, he argues, could actually enhance devotion, not diminish it. Another responds that true discipline requires resisting such comforts, that the struggle itself, the effort to remain awake, alert, present, is part of the spiritual journey. You can almost hear the unspoken addition. If it's easy, it's probably not holy enough. Historians are still debating how widespread these disagreements were and how openly they were expressed. Some records suggest formal rules that either permitted or restricted daytime sleep, while others hint at more informal negotiations within communities. As with many things in history, the reality likely varied from one monastery to another. But what's clear is that this wasn't just about being tired. It was about control. Control over the body, over desires, over the subtle pull toward comfort. Sleep in this context becomes more than rest, it becomes a test. And like any test, people have different strategies for passing it. You glance toward the end of the table, where a younger monk sits, eyes slightly unfocused, as if he's already halfway into a nap that technically hasn't been approved yet. It's a bold move, risky, admirable, in a slightly reckless way. If medieval monasteries had a version of that one guy in class who's always half asleep but somehow still passes, you've just found him. The meal ends, and you rise with the others, the conversation dissolving back into silence. No resolution, no final verdict. Just a quiet understanding that this debate will continue, perhaps later today, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps indefinitely. As you step back into the corridor, the light has grown stronger, though your body hasn't quite caught up. You feel that familiar heaviness behind your eyes, the kind that suggests your brain is gently requesting a system reboot. And yet, there's work to be done. Tasks await, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, maintaining the monastery. The day doesn't pause just because you're tired. If anything, it expects you to rise above it. Still, the idea lingers. A nap, a small, forbidden, possibly justifiable nap. You find yourself wondering who's right, the ones who argue for rest or the ones who resist it. Whether a brief surrender to sleep is a weakness or a necessary kindness. And as you move through the morning, that quiet question follows you, like a shadow you can't quite shake. Because sooner or later you'll have to decide. Or at least, try not to fall asleep while pretending you already have. Section 4. You carry that quiet question with you as the morning stretches on. Your hands busy with work while your mind drifts somewhere between wakefulness and the very persuasive idea of lying down. The scriptorium is warmer than the chapel, though only slightly, and the faint scratch of quills on parchment creates a steady, almost soothing rhythm. If white noise machines had existed in the medieval world, this would have been a premium setting. Gentle monastic scribbling, 8 hours, no ads. You sit at a wooden desk worn smooth by generations before you, carefully copying lines of text you've already read 3 times because your focus keeps slipping. The letters blur slightly, not enough to ruin your work, but enough to remind you that your brain is operating at what modern people might generously call low battery mode. And yet there's something guiding all of this. Not just the bells, not just tradition, but a rule, a written framework that defines how life here is meant to unfold, including, very specifically, how you sleep. This is where the influence of Saint Benedict of Nursia quietly enters your day, like an invisible supervisor who never clocks out. Centuries earlier, Benedict laid down a set of guidelines for monastic life that would shape communities across Europe. His rule, often simply called the Rule of Benedict, was not just a list of suggestions. It was a carefully structured vision of balance, prayer, work, discipline, and yes, sleep. You might expect it to be brutally strict, like a medieval boot camp with candles. But surprisingly, Benedict's approach was measured. He didn't believe in completely depriving monks of rest. In fact, he specified that monks should sleep for a reasonable portion of the night, though reasonable here still feels a bit ambitious by your standards. The rule suggests that monks should sleep fully clothed, ready to rise quickly when called, which sounds efficient until you realize it also means no cozy blankets, no changing into something comfortable. Just you, your robe, and a commitment to not getting too attached to comfort. If you've ever fallen asleep in your clothes after a long day and woken up feeling slightly betrayed by your own life choices, congratulations, you're halfway to understanding this system. But Benedict also emphasized moderation. Too little sleep could weaken a monk, making it harder to fulfill his duties. Too much sleep, on the other hand, could lead to idleness, a word that in this context carries the weight of a serious warning. There's even a line of thinking within monastic tradition that idleness is the enemy of the soul, which if applied to modern life would make scrolling endlessly through your phone a highly suspicious activity. The monks, thankfully, were spared that particular temptation. Instead, they had to worry about things like naps. As you continue copying your manuscript, you notice a small detail. The monk across from you pauses, just briefly, his quill hovering above the page. His eyes close for a second, just a second, and then open again. It's so quick you might have missed it if you weren't experiencing the exact same temptation. Microsleep, medieval edition. It raises an interesting point. Even with rules, even with discipline, the human body has its own opinions, and those opinions tend to get louder when you're tired. Benedict's rule tried to account for this by adjusting routines based on seasons. In the summer, when days were longer, schedules shifted slightly. In the winter, when nights stretched on, there was more time allocated for rest, at least in theory. In practice, well, that's where things get complicated. Because while the rule provided a foundation, individual monasteries often interpreted it differently. Some followed it closely, maintaining a careful balance between rest and duty. Others leaned toward stricter enforcement, trimming sleep wherever they felt it might encourage greater discipline. And then there were the quiet adjustments, the unofficial tweaks made by communities trying to survive the reality of daily life. A few extra moments of rest here, a slightly delayed rising there. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep everyone functional. Historians are still debating how rigidly the Rule of Benedict was applied across different regions and time periods. Some evidence suggests a high level of consistency, while other records hint at a more flexible and adaptive approach. As always, the truth likely lies somewhere in between, like a monk trying to stay upright during matins. You shift in your seat, your back reminding you that medieval furniture was not designed with ergonomic support in mind. There's no lumbar cushion, no adjustable height, just wood, determination, and the vague hope that you won't turn into a human question mark by the end of the day. Still, you keep writing, because that's the expectation, not perfection, not endless energy, just persistence. And yet the question remains, how much sleep is enough? Benedict offered an answer, but not a perfectly fixed one. His rule leaves room, small, carefully measured room, for judgment. for leaders of monasteries to adjust based on the needs of their community, which means that even here, even within a system designed for order, there's space for disagreement. You can almost imagine it. Abbots discussing schedules, weighing discipline against practicality, trying to decide whether allowing a short rest might actually lead to better focus during prayer, or whether it risks opening the door to something less controlled. It's not a loud argument, no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, just ongoing consideration shaped by experience, observation, and the quiet reality that monks, despite their devotion, are still human. You finish a line of text and pause, flexing your fingers slightly. The ink glistens for a moment before settling into the parchment, a small reminder that even the tiniest actions leave a mark. Outside, somewhere in the distance, you hear it again. The bell. Of course, it's always the bell, and as you set down your quill and rise with the others, you realize something that feels both obvious and strangely profound. In this place, sleep is not just about rest, it's about obedience, to the rule, to the rhythm, to a vision of life that tries, earnestly, imperfectly, to balance the needs of the body with the demands of the spirit. Whether it succeeds, well, that's still up for debate. And judging by the way your eyelids feel right now, that debate is far from over. Section 5, you step back into the open air, and this time the light feels different. It's no longer that hesitant gray of early dawn. It's brighter now, clearer, stretching across the monastery walls like a slow, steady awakening. And yet, somehow, you feel more tired than before. It's the kind of tired that doesn't quite make sense, like your body missed an important meeting and is now trying to catch up on notes. The courtyard hums quietly with movement. Monks pass by in silence, each heading toward their assigned tasks, their robes brushing softly against the stone. You join them, though your steps feel just a little heavier now, as if gravity has decided to increase its influence specifically on you. If mornings in your world are powered by coffee, quick showers, and maybe a scroll through your phone, mornings here are powered by determination and possibly sheer stubbornness. You're guided toward the garden, where the scent of damp earth rises gently into the air. It's calming in a way, grounding. You kneel to tend a row of plants, your hands moving almost automatically, loosening soil, pulling small weeds, trying to focus on something simple and repetitive. But your mind drifts again, this time towards something you hadn't fully considered before: seasons. Because unlike your neatly climate-controlled environment, this place lives and breathes with the natural world. And that means the rules of sleep don't stay exactly the same all year. In winter, nights are long, very long, the kind of long that makes you wonder if the sun has quietly resigned. In theory, this should mean more time for sleep, and in some monasteries, it does. The schedule shifts slightly, allowing monks a longer stretch of rest before the first bell calls them to prayer. But here's the twist. Longer nights also mean longer periods of darkness, which can blur the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness. Without artificial lighting, no glowing screens, no bedside lamps, your sense of time becomes flexible. You wake up, but is it midnight? Is it early morning? Is it still the same night? It's like living in a world where your phone battery died and took the clock with it. Some monastic communities adapted by adjusting prayer times, spacing them differently to account for the extended darkness. Others maintained a stricter schedule, regardless of the season, prioritizing consistency over comfort. And naturally, this led to more quiet disagreements. One group might argue that in winter, when the body naturally craves more rest, it makes sense to allow it. That working with the rhythms of nature is not a weakness, but a form of harmony. Another might insist that discipline should remain constant, that changing the schedule too much risks softening the structure that holds everything together. It's a bit like arguing whether you should wake up earlier in winter to stay productive, or accept that it's cold, dark, and maybe your soul just wants to hibernate a little. The monks, it seems, were having their own version of this debate, just with more chanting and fewer blankets. You pause, brushing soil from your hands, and glance up at the sky. Even now, with the sun rising, there's a crispness in the air that suggests colder months aren't far away. And with them, new challenges. There's a lesser-known detail tucked into some historical accounts. In particularly harsh winters, certain monasteries made practical adjustments, not always officially recorded, but remembered in subtle ways. A slightly delayed rising time, a bit more allowance for rest, small changes just enough to keep the community functioning. Because here's the thing, while ideals can be rigid, reality tends to be negotiable. Historians are still debating how widespread these seasonal adjustments were and how openly they were acknowledged. Some sources emphasize strict adherence to established rules, while others hint at a more flexible approach shaped by necessity. As always, the lived experience likely sat somewhere in the middle, balanced between principle and practicality. You return to your work, your movement steady, but your thoughts still drifting. There's something almost comforting about the idea that even in a place defined by discipline, there's room, however small, for adaptation. That the monks weren't just blindly following a script, but quietly adjusting it, line by line, to fit the reality of their lives. Of course, not everyone would admit that. Some would argue that any deviation, however minor, risks undermining the entire structure. That once you start bending the rules, even for something as innocent as a bit more sleep in winter, you might find yourself sliding further than intended. It's a familiar kind of logic. The same voice that tells you, if I stay in bed 5 more minutes, I might never get up again. Which, to be fair, sometimes feels completely accurate. A faint breeze passes through the garden, rustling leaves, carrying with it a quiet reminder that time is moving forward, whether you feel ready or not. And then, as if on cue, the bell. Of course, you almost expect it now, like a predictable plot twist in a story you're slowly learning by heart. Still, there's a part of you that hopes, just briefly, that this time it might not ring, that maybe, just maybe, you'll be granted a few extra moments to sit, to breathe, to rest. No such luck. You rise with the others, brushing off your robe, and begin walking back toward the monastery buildings. Your body protests slightly, a subtle resistance that you've started to recognize as part of the daily rhythm. And yet, you go, because that's what everyone does. As you move through the corridor once more, the earlier conversation about naps drifts back into your thoughts. Now layered with something new, the influence of seasons, the quiet adjustments, the ongoing balance between rule and reality. Sleep, you realize, is not a fixed thing here. It shifts, it adapts, it's argued over, adjusted, defended. And in that shifting, there's something deeply human. Because no matter how structured the life, no matter how clear the rules, the body still speaks, sometimes softly, sometimes very, very loudly. And as you take your place once again, preparing for whatever comes next, you can't help but wonder, when winter truly arrives, will the rules bend just a little more? Or will you simply learn to be even more tired, but somehow used to it? Section 6. You file back inside with the others, your body now carrying that familiar quiet heaviness, like a cloak you didn't choose, but have somehow grown used to wearing. The corridor feels narrower than before, or maybe that's just your awareness sharpening as fatigue settles in deeper. Every step echoes slightly, and for a moment, you focus on the rhythm of your own footsteps, as if counting them might keep you awake. It doesn't really work. You're guided toward the dormitory again, not to sleep. Oh no, that would be far too convenient, but to retrieve something. And as you enter, the stillness hits you immediately. Rows of simple beds, blankets folded, everything in its place. Except, not quite everything. There's a faint, almost delicate sound in the air. At first, you think it's just the wind slipping through a crack in the stone. But then it comes again, soft, uneven, unmistakable. Snoring. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to exist. You glance toward the far end of the room, where one monk remains lying down, turned slightly to the side, breathing deeply, completely unaware that the world has once again moved on without him. It's a bold choice. You can't help but admire it. Because in a place where the bell rules everything, ignoring it, even briefly, is practically an act of rebellion. A very sleepy rebellion, but still. Of course, this is not exactly encouraged. Communal sleeping arrangements were common in many monasteries, especially in earlier periods. The idea was simple. Shared space encourages shared discipline. It's harder to oversleep when everyone else is getting up. It's also harder to pretend you didn't hear the bell when 20 other people clearly did. But it also means one unavoidable truth. You sleep next to other humans. And humans, as it turns out, are not always the quietest creatures. Snoring, shifting, The occasional murmur. These sounds become part of the nightly experience. There's no white noise machine to smooth it out, no earbuds, no polite, hey, you might want to see a sleep specialist. Just acceptance, or at least attempted acceptance. There are records, small, almost humorous glimpses of monks struggling with this very issue. Complaints, not loud ones, but present. Suggestions that perhaps certain individuals should be positioned further away, or that sleeping arrangements could be adjusted to minimize disturbance. It's the medieval version of trying to subtly suggest that your roommate might consider sleeping on the other side of the room. Very subtle, very polite, deeply relatable. You move quietly, trying not to draw attention, though your eyes keep drifting back to the still sleeping monk. No one rushes to wake him immediately. There's a pause, a kind of collective hesitation, as if everyone is silently deciding who's going to be the one to break the news that he has, in fact, missed the bell. Eventually, a senior monk steps forward, places a gentle hand on his shoulder, and gives a slight shake. The reaction is immediate. A startled inhale, a quick blink, and then realization. If you've ever woken up late and instantly understood that something has gone wrong, you know that exact expression. It's universal, timeless, slightly tragic. The monk sits up quickly, adjusting his robe, his movements efficient, but carrying just a hint of embarrassment. There's no dramatic scolding, no public spectacle, just a quiet understanding that this is not ideal. Because here, oversleeping isn't just a personal inconvenience, it's a disruption. The schedule depends on everyone moving together, like a carefully tuned instrument. One person out of sync doesn't break the system, but it does create a small ripple. And in a place built on order, even small ripples matter. You turn away, giving him a bit of privacy, though you can't help but think about how easily that could have been you. In fact, given how your eyelids feel right now, it might still be you at some point. There's also an interesting detail that surfaces in some accounts. In certain monasteries, the dormitory was overseen by a designated monk, whose job included ensuring that everyone rose on time. Not in a harsh, authoritarian way, but as a kind of gentle guardian of the schedule. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of that one friend who actually wakes up on time and somehow feels responsible for making sure everyone else does too. A rare and slightly mysterious individual. Historians are still debating how strictly these roles were enforced and how much variation existed between different communities. Some descriptions suggest careful supervision, while others imply a more relaxed approach, relying on personal discipline. Again, the pattern repeats, structure tempered by reality. You step back into the corridor, the faint sounds of movement replacing the quiet of the dormitory. The moment passes, but the idea lingers. Sleep here is not just about when you rest. It's about how your rest affects others. If you snore, someone hears it. If you oversleep, someone notices. If you toss and turn, the ripple spreads. It's a shared experience, whether you like it or not. And that adds another layer to the ongoing debate, because now it's not just about personal discipline or spiritual focus, it's about community. Is it fair to allow naps if they risk disrupting the schedule? Should allowances be made for those who struggle more with fatigue? How much flexibility can exist before the entire rhythm begins to loosen? These aren't questions with easy answers. You walk a little slower now, your thoughts drifting again. Not quite asleep, not fully awake. That strange in-between state becomes more familiar with every passing hour. If modern life sometimes feels like a blur between tasks and notifications, this feels like a blur between moments of alertness and the constant pull of rest. And through it all, the bell continues to anchor everything. Predictable, unyielding. You hear it again in the distance, not loud this time, as just enough to remind you that another segment of the day is about to begin. Of course it is. You straighten slightly, adjusting your robe, trying to gather what little energy you have left for whatever comes next. Behind you, the dormitory returns to stillness. Ahead, the day continues, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between bells, between breaths, between thoughts, you begin to understand something subtle but important. In this place, even something as simple as sleep becomes a shared responsibility, which means every sigh, every snore, every stolen moment of rest matters more than you might expect. Section 7. You move along with the others again. though now your steps feel just slightly less automatic, as if your body is beginning to question the long-term sustainability of this arrangement. The corridor seems warmer than before, or maybe you're just too tired to notice the cold as sharply. Either way, you follow the familiar path, guided not by thought, but by repetition. It's almost comforting in a strange way, until you remember what happens when that rhythm breaks. Because while most monks follow the schedule with quiet precision, not everyone manages it perfectly every time. And in a place where time is measured not by clocks, but by obedience, even small deviations have consequences. Not dramatic, thunder and lightning consequences. This isn't that kind of story, but noticeable ones. You enter a small chamber off the main hall, where a few monks have gathered. There's no tension in the air, but there is a certain seriousness, like a classroom where everyone knows someone forgot to do the assignment. And today it seems someone overslept. Not just a few seconds, not a gentle delay, but enough to miss a significant portion of the schedule. You don't see the moment it's addressed directly, but you feel it. The way the others stand just a little straighter. The way the conversation, if it can be called that, shifts into something more structured. Monastic life, as you've already begun to realize, isn't just guided by ideals. It's maintained by gentle correction. Sometimes, slightly less gentle. The monk in question steps forward, his expression calm but clearly aware of the situation. There's no public shaming, no raised voices, just a quiet acknowledgement that something has gone wrong. And then, a consequence. In some monasteries, this might take the form of a small penance, perhaps additional prayers, or a temporary adjustment to duties. In stricter communities, it could involve reduced privileges, like eating later than others, or sitting apart during meals. Nothing extreme, nothing harsh by modern standards, but enough to make an impression. It's a bit like being told you can't have dessert because you didn't follow the schedule. Except here, dessert is already not really a thing, so the stakes feel oddly higher. There's a subtle message behind it all. Your actions affect the whole. If one monk drifts out of rhythm, the harmony of the group shifts slightly, and in a life built around shared discipline, that harmony matters. You watch as the monk nods, accepting the correction without protest. There's no argument, no attempt to justify, just acknowledgement. It's surprisingly calm, which in a way makes it more effective, because this isn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about maintaining a structure that everyone relies on, even if that structure sometimes feels like it's held together by equal parts devotion and sheer willpower. There's also an interesting detail that appears in some historical accounts. In certain monastic traditions, repeated oversleeping could be interpreted not just as a lapse in discipline, but as a sign of deeper spiritual struggle. Not in a judgmental way, more like a concern. Is the monk unwell, overworked, distracted, or is something else pulling his attention away? It's a reminder that even something as simple as sleep, or the lack of it, can carry layers of meaning in this environment. Historians are still debating how consistently these interpretations were applied and how much variation existed between different monasteries. Some sources suggest a highly structured system of correction, while others indicate a more individualized approach, shaped by the abbot's discretion. Again, that balance appears: rule and reality, ideal and human limitation. You shift your weight slightly, trying to stay focused, though your mind keeps drifting back to one simple thought. What if it were you? What if tomorrow, or even later today, you missed the bell just a little too long? Would you stand there the same way, calm and accepting? Or would there be that small flicker of frustration, of wanting just a bit more rest in a world that rarely offers it? It's not an easy question, because on one hand, the structure is what holds everything together. Without it, the rhythm dissolves. On the other hand, you're tired, very tired, and that's where the quiet tension lives, the one that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. You step back as the moment concludes, the group dispersing once more, returning to their tasks as if nothing unusual has happened. The rhythm resumes, steady and familiar, but now you've seen what happens when it falters. Not chaos, not collapse, just a gentle correction, a reminder, and maybe, just maybe, a little extra pressure to stay in sync. As you walk away, you notice something small but telling. The monk who overslept moves with slightly more urgency now, his steps quicker, his posture more alert. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Because here, every action is part of something larger, even sleep, especially sleep. You take a slow breath, trying to gather yourself again as the day continues. The bell hasn't rung yet, but you can almost feel it coming, like a distant thought forming at the edge of your mind. Predictable, unavoidable, and somehow reassuring. Because even though it demands so much from you, it also gives you something in return: a structure, a rhythm, a way to move forward, even when you're not entirely sure you have the energy to do so. Still, as you follow the others once more, that same quiet question lingers, softer now but no less persistent. How long can anyone truly keep this up? And more importantly, are you supposed to? Section 8. You settle back into the slow rhythm of the day, though settle might be a generous word. It's more like you drift, half guided by routine, half carried by whatever energy you have left. The light has shifted again, warmer now, casting long, gentle shadows along the stone walls. It should feel comforting. Instead, your body feels like it's negotiating terms. You move into the chapel once more, the familiar scent of wax and old stone wrapping around you like a quiet echo of earlier hours. The chanting resumes, steady as ever, but something about it feels heavier now. Not louder, not harsher, just more demanding. Because this time, it's not just about staying awake. It's about what sleep itself means. You kneel, trying to focus, but your thoughts drift again toward that earlier conversation about naps. Only now, it's not just a practical question. It's become something deeper, something wrapped in belief. In many monastic teachings, sleep isn't just rest, it's a vulnerability, a moment where control slips, where the mind softens, where, according to some interpretations, temptation can quietly enter. Not in a dramatic lightning strike kind of way, but in subtle, creeping forms. There's even a concept that appears in various spiritual writings, that excessive sleep can open the door to what they considered spiritual dangers: laziness, distraction, even impure thoughts. It sounds intense. But in their world, where every aspect of life is tied to spiritual purpose, even something as ordinary as sleep carries weight. You try to imagine explaining this to someone from your world. Hey, I think I slept too much, and now my soul might be slightly compromised. They would probably suggest drinking more water and maybe going for a walk. Different frameworks, very different frameworks. Still, for the monks, this concern is real. You notice a senior monk speaking softly after the prayers, his voice calm, measured, almost soothing despite the seriousness of his words. He doesn't condemn sleep outright, far from it. He acknowledges its necessity, but he warns against excess, against letting the body lead too much. Because in this view, discipline is what keeps everything aligned. Without it, even small indulgences, like a longer nap, can gradually shift priorities. It's not about one nap. It's about what that nap represents. You shift slightly, your knees reminding you that stone floors are not particularly forgiving. If modern yoga classes had this kind of flooring, attendance would drop significantly, probably within minutes. The monk continues, and you notice how the others listen, not with fear, but with quiet attention. This isn't new information. It's reinforcement, a reminder of the balance they're all trying to maintain. There's also an interesting lesser-known detail in some monastic writings. Certain authors describe specific times of day, especially midday, as particularly vulnerable to drowsiness and distraction. This period was sometimes associated with a kind of spiritual lethargy, where both body and mind felt unusually heavy. If that sounds familiar, it's because it absolutely is. Modern people call it the afternoon slump. The monks, however, gave it a much more dramatic interpretation. Same feeling, very different branding. Historians are still debating how literally these ideas were taken and how much they influence daily practice. Some texts suggest a strong emphasis on resisting daytime sleep, while others indicate a more balanced approach, recognizing that complete exhaustion wasn't exactly helpful either. Again, the pattern repeats: tension, negotiation, adaptation. You glance around the chapel, noticing the small signs of that tension playing out in real time. A monk blinking a little slower than before, another shifting his posture, trying to stay alert. Someone else pressing their lips together slightly, as if sheer determination might keep sleep at bay. It's almost like watching a group of people trying very hard not to yawn during a long meeting. Except here, the stakes feel higher. And yet, there's no judgment in the air, just effort. Shared, quiet effort. You lower your gaze, focusing on the rhythm of your breathing, trying to anchor yourself in the present moment. Inhale, exhale, stay awake, repeat. It works for a while. Then your thoughts drift again. You think about how strange it is that something so natural, sleep, can become such a complex topic, debated, regulated, even slightly feared. In your world, sleep is often framed as something to improve, optimize, or recover. Here, it's something to manage carefully, almost cautiously. Not too much, not too little, just enough, which, as you're discovering, is easier said than done. The chanting slows, then fades, leaving a brief, gentle silence in its wake. It's the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty, like it's holding something just out of reach. You take a slow breath, your body grateful for even this small pause, but you know it won't last. Because nothing here stays still for long. Not the schedule, not the expectations, not even your own thoughts. As you rise with the others, you feel that familiar pull again, that quiet, persistent desire to just lie down for a moment. Just a moment. You don't act on it. Not here, not now. But the idea lingers, because now it's not just about being tired. It's about what that tiredness means. Is it a weakness to be resisted, a signal to be respected, or something in between? You step back into the corridor, the light shifting once more as the day continues its slow progression. The bell hasn't rung yet, but you can feel it coming, like a breath waiting to be released. And as you walk, that same thought follows you, softer now, almost like a whisper. Maybe the real challenge isn't choosing between sleep and wakefulness. Maybe it's learning how to exist somewhere in the middle, even if that middle feels a little unsteady and very, very tired. Section 9. You step out of the chapel again, and this time the light feels almost too bright, as if the sun has decided to overachieve while you are still very much underperforming. You squint slightly, your eyes adjusting, your brain doing its best to catch up with a day that seems determined to move forward whether you're ready or not. You pause for just a second in the courtyard, letting the warmth touch your face. It's pleasant, almost suspiciously pleasant. The kind of warmth that makes you think, this would be a perfect moment for a nap, which, of course, makes it immediately dangerous in this environment. Because here, comfort is always under quiet surveillance. You're directed toward another task, something simple, carrying small bundles of wood toward a storage area. It's not difficult, but your arms feel heavier than they should. Your movements just a fraction slower. You begin to understand how fatigue doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it just quietly reduces everything by 10%. 10% less strength, 10% less focus, 10% more likely to stare into the distance and forget what you were doing. If modern productivity apps tracked monk mode, yours would currently be flashing a polite but concerned warning, and then it hits you. There is no coffee. Not here, not now, not anywhere in your immediate future. The realization settles in like a slow, dramatic plot twist, because in your world, this is the moment where caffeine steps in like a heroic side character, lifting your energy, sharpening your focus, convincing you that yes, you can absolutely function like a responsible human being. But coffee, as you know it, hasn't reached medieval European monasteries yet. Its widespread use will come much later, gradually making its way across regions and cultures before becoming the beloved ritual it is today. Here you have none of that. No espresso, no tea break with a comforting mug, no energy drinks promising impossible levels of alertness, just you and your very determined exhaustion. You set down a bundle of wood and take a slow breath, as if oxygen alone might be enough to power you through the rest of the day. It's a bold strategy. Results are mixed. Of course, the monks weren't entirely without methods for staying awake. They relied on routine, on physical activity, on the structure of their day. Movement itself, working in the garden, walking between spaces, helped keep the body engaged. There were also certain dietary habits that played a role. Meals were simple, often light, which meant no heavy feasts to pull you into an immediate food coma. If anything, the lack of excess might have helped maintain a baseline level of alertness. Still, it's not exactly a substitute for caffeine. You glance around and notice how others manage it. One monk moves steadily, his posture upright, his expression calm. He doesn't look energized, but he looks stable. like he's found a rhythm that doesn't rely on sudden bursts of energy, but on something more consistent. Another pauses briefly, stretching his shoulders, rolling his neck slightly before continuing. Small adjustments, tiny resets. And then there's one who simply blinks a lot. Very effective. You consider trying that strategy yourself. Blink your way through exhaustion. It sounds questionable, but at this point, you're open to experimentation. There's an interesting detail that appears in some historical discussions. Before caffeine became widely available in Europe, people were simply more accustomed to functioning without it. Their expectations of energy, focus, and even productivity were different, which raises a quiet, slightly uncomfortable thought. Maybe the problem isn't that they had less energy. Maybe it's that you're used to having more artificially. You let that idea sit for a moment as you pick up another bundle of wood. It's not a criticism, just an observation. Different systems, different adaptations. Historians are still debating how much of a difference the later introduction of caffeinated beverages made to daily life and work patterns in Europe. Some suggest it significantly increased alertness and productivity, while others argue that people simply adjusted their habits over time. Either way, standing here now, you can confidently say, a cup of coffee would be life-changing. You almost laugh at the thought, though it comes out more like a quiet exhale. Humor feels slightly delayed, like everything else. As you continue working, you notice something else, something subtle but important. Despite the lack of modern stimulants, despite the fragmented sleep, the monks are still functioning. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but consistently. There's a steadiness to it, a rhythm that doesn't spike and crash, but moves in a more even line. It's not exciting, but it works. You adjust your grip, lifting another bundle, your muscles protesting just enough to remind you they exist. The sun climbs a little higher, the shadows shifting, marking time in a way that feels both ancient and strangely reliable. And through it all, the absence of caffeine becomes almost symbolic because it strips things down. No quick fixes, no shortcuts, just routine, discipline, and the slow accumulation of effort. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it's real. You set the final bundle in place and straighten up, taking a moment to stretch your back. The movement feels good, grounding you just a little more in the present. And then, the bell, of course. At this point, you're starting to feel like the bell is less of a sound and more of a personality, persistent, unavoidable, slightly judgmental. You wipe your hands lightly against your robe and begin walking back with the others, your steps a little more deliberate now. Because even without coffee, even without long stretches of sleep, the day continues. And somehow, so do you. Not at your best, not at your sharpest, but still moving, still following, still part of the rhythm. As you re-enter the monastery, the cool air greeting you once again, you realize something quietly surprising. You're adapting. Slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. And maybe that's the most unexpected part of all. Because even in a world without caffeine, without comfort, without the luxury of uninterrupted rest, you're still here, still awake, mostly. And that in itself feels like a small, slightly miraculous achievement. Section 10. You move back inside with the others, the cool stone air wrapping around you again like a familiar, slightly judgmental blanket. At this point, your body has stopped asking why and has started asking how much longer, which is progress in a very questionable way. The corridor branches, and for the first time, you're guided in a slightly different direction. Not far. Nothing in a monastery is ever dramatically far, but just enough to make you notice. Because not all monasteries are the same. Up until now, your experience has felt consistent, almost universal. Bells, prayers, fragmented sleep, quiet debates about naps. It all seems like a shared script. But in reality, monastic life across medieval Europe was far more varied than it might appear from the outside. Different orders, different interpretations, different priorities, and as you're about to discover, different rules about sleep. You enter a smaller chamber where a few monks are gathered, their conversation low but more open than usual. There's a sense of comparison in the air, as if stories are being exchanged, not gossip exactly, but observations. One monk mentions another monastery he once visited, where the schedule allowed slightly longer rest during certain times of the year. Not dramatically longer, but enough to notice, enough to feel human. Another responds, gently but firmly, that such allowances risk weakening discipline. That consistency is what maintains order, and once you begin adjusting too much, the structure itself might start to soften. You stand quietly, listening, realizing that this isn't just a local conversation, it's part of something broader. Because medieval monastic life wasn't one single system. There were multiple orders, each with its own interpretation of how life should be lived. Some followed the rule of Saint Benedict closely, emphasizing balance and moderation. Others adopted stricter approaches, reducing comforts wherever possible, including sleep. And then there were communities that, while still disciplined, allowed for small adaptations based on environment, climate, and practical needs. It's a bit like comparing different lifestyles today. Some people wake up at 5 a.m. every day with military precision, others follow a more flexible schedule, and everyone is quietly convinced their version is the correct one. The monks, it seems, were no different. You notice how the tone of the discussion remains calm, even when the perspectives differ. There's no argument in the modern sense, no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just careful expression, respectful disagreement. It's almost soothing. If modern debates had this level of calm, the internet would probably be a very different place. One monk points out that in warmer regions, particularly in southern parts of Europe, a short rest during the hottest part of the day was not just comfortable, but practical. Working under intense midday heat without pause could lead to exhaustion that affected the rest of the day. Another counters that true discipline should not depend on external conditions, that the purpose of monastic life is to rise above such influences, not adjust to them. You can feel the balance shifting back and forth like a quiet pendulum. Practicality, discipline, human need, spiritual ideal, all moving together, never quite settling in one place. There's also a lesser-known detail that surfaces in some historical discussions. Certain monastic communities developed unique routines that blended elements from different traditions, creating hybrid schedules that didn't fit neatly into one category. These weren't always officially documented, but traces of them appear in letters, notes, and small variations in daily practice. It's a reminder that even in highly structured environments, individuality finds a way to exist, quietly, subtly, but persistently. Historians are still debating how much these differences impacted the daily experience of monks and whether some systems were more sustainable than others. Some argue that stricter schedules led to greater discipline, while others suggest that more flexible approaches allowed for longer-term stability. Standing here, slightly sleep-deprived and very aware of your own limits, you find yourself leaning toward one side. You don't say it out loud, but internally, you're very much on team. Maybe a little more sleep wouldn't hurt. You shift your weight again, your legs reminding you that standing still is somehow more tiring than moving. It's a strange paradox, but one you're becoming increasingly familiar with. The conversation begins to fade, the monks dispersing once more, returning to their respective duties. No final conclusion, no clear winner, just continuation. Because that's how this works. Not a single answer, but an ongoing process. You step back into the corridor, your mind still turning over what you've heard. The idea that even within this structured world, there's variation, that not everything is fixed. It changes something, just slightly, because it means that the way things are now isn't the only way they could be. And that thought, small as it is, feels surprisingly significant. Ahead of you, the familiar path unfolds again, leading you back toward the central spaces of the monastery. Your steps fall into rhythm with the others, the sound soft, almost meditative. And then, right on cue, the bell. At this point, you're almost tempted to greet it like an old acquaintance. Ah, yes, you again. I was just thinking about you. It rings steady and certain, pulling everyone back into alignment. You follow, of course, because that's what you do here. You follow the rhythm. Even as you begin to understand that the rhythm itself isn't entirely the same everywhere. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real story begins. Not in the rules, but in the differences between them. Differences that shape how people live, how they rest, and how they quietly negotiate something as simple and as complicated as sleep. Section 11. You follow the others once more, though now your awareness has shifted. It's no longer just about keeping up, it's about noticing. The small pauses, the subtle hesitations, the tiny moments where the rhythm bends just enough to reveal something underneath. The corridor opens into a quieter part of the monastery, less traveled, the air a little stiller. You're not entirely sure why you're here, only that your steps have slowed just slightly, and somehow you've drifted. Not far, just enough. And that's when you see it. A monk seated against the wall, head tilted forward, eyes closed, not in prayer, not in contemplation, but unmistakably asleep. Not deeply, not dramatically, just a small, quiet nap. Unsure whether to move on or pretend you didn't notice. It feels like stumbling upon something mildly forbidden, like finding a hidden shortcut in a game that no one officially acknowledges. Because this is exactly what they were debating earlier. A nap, in the middle of the day, unofficial, unscheduled, and yet undeniably happening. The monk stirs slightly as if sensing your presence, then stills again, committed to the moment. It's almost impressive. There's a kind of skill in this, a balance between rest and readiness, like he could wake at any second and seamlessly rejoin the rhythm. You can't help but admire it, carefully, quietly. Because while this might seem harmless, even necessary, it exists in that gray space between allowance and restriction. Some monasteries tolerated brief rests, especially in private or during less structured moments. Others discouraged them entirely, viewing unscheduled sleep as a lapse in discipline. And yet here it is, happening anyway. It's a reminder that rules, no matter how carefully written, always meet reality at some point. And reality tends to be flexible. You shift your weight, trying not to make noise, though the stone floor seems determined to announce your presence with every step. The monk doesn't wait. You wonder how many others do this. How many quiet naps are scattered throughout the day, tucked into corners, hidden between duties, just long enough to take the edge off the constant fatigue. It's not rebellion, not really, more like adaptation, a way of surviving within the structure without openly challenging it. There's a lesser-known detail in some historical observations. In certain communities, while official rules might restrict daytime sleep, enforcement wasn't always absolute. Minor deviations, especially those that didn't disrupt others, could be quietly overlooked, not approved, but not always punished, a kind of silent understanding. Historians are still debating how widespread this practice was and how much it varied between monasteries. Some evidence suggests strict enforcement, while other accounts hint at a more nuanced reality, where small allowances existed beneath the surface. Standing here now, watching this one monk rest for just a moment, you begin to understand how that might work. Because when everyone is tired, everyone understands, even if they don't say it out loud. You take a slow breath and continue walking, leaving him undisturbed. It feels like the right choice. Not out of rule, but out of something softer, something human. As you move back toward the main corridor, the sounds of the monastery return gradually. Footsteps, soft voices, the faint echo of activity continuing, uninterrupted. You slip back into that flow, your presence blending in once more, as if you never stepped away. But something has changed. Just a little. Because now you've seen the other side of the system. Not the rules, not the ideals, but the quiet ways people live within them. You notice it more now. A monk lingering just a fraction longer in a doorway. Another pausing, eyes closed as if gathering strength before moving on. Small moments, barely noticeable, but meaningful. If modern life is full of hidden breaks, checking your phone, staring out a window, letting your mind wander, this is the medieval version. Less obvious, more necessary. You return to your task, whatever it happens to be now, your hands moving with a kind of practiced familiarity. But your mind carries that image with it. The monk asleep against the wall, peaceful, still. For just a moment, free from the constant pull of the bell. You wonder what he dreams about, if he dreams at all, or if it's just a brief escape into nothingness, a reset button in a world that rarely pauses. And then, almost on cue, of course, it always comes. You glance back instinctively, but the monk is already stirring, waking quickly, adjusting his robe, slipping back into the rhythm as if nothing happened. It's seamless, almost invisible. If you hadn't seen it, you might never have known. And that perhaps is the most fascinating part, because in a place defined by structure, the smallest acts of flexibility often leave no trace at all. You follow the others again, your steps steady, your mind a little more aware, a little more curious. Because now you're not just experiencing the rhythm, you're starting to see the spaces between it. And in those spaces, you're beginning to understand how people truly live here. Not perfectly, not rigidly, but quietly, creatively, and sometimes just a little bit asleep. Section 12. You move forward again, slipping back into the steady current of the monastery, though now everything feels just a little softer around the edges. Not quieter, not slower, just dimmer, as if your senses have decided to lower the brightness setting to conserve energy. The corridor narrows, then opens into a chamber lit almost entirely by candles. Their light flickers gently, casting long, wavering shadows that stretch across the stone walls like slow-moving thoughts. It's beautiful, in a quiet, understated way. Also, not ideal for staying awake. You take your place, the warm glow settling around you, and immediately you notice something subtle but powerful. Without the sun, without sharp light, your body begins to shift. Your eyes relax, your breathing slows, your brain starts whispering, this would be a great time to sleep. And honestly, it makes a compelling argument. Because in this world, light is everything. There are no overhead bulbs, no glowing screens, no sudden bursts of artificial brightness to reset your alertness. When the sun sets, darkness follows, and with it, a natural signal to rest. But here's the complication. The schedule doesn't fully follow that signal. You're expected to wake during the night, to pray, to move, to function, even when every part of your body is gently insisting otherwise. It creates a kind of tension between what your body wants and what the rhythm requires. You sit there, watching the candle flame flicker, and you can almost feel your internal clock trying to make sense of it all. In modern terms, you'd call it a circadian rhythm, a natural cycle influenced by light and darkness. Here that cycle is adjusted, not completely ignored, but definitely reshaped. Monks in the medieval period didn't have the scientific language to describe circadian rhythms, but they absolutely experienced them. They knew, in a practical sense, that certain times of day felt easier, more alert, more focused, and others felt heavier, slower, more difficult. And yet the structure of monastic life often required them to push against those natural patterns, especially at night. There's a fascinating detail in some historical observations. In certain monasteries, the use of candlelight and the timing of night prayers may have subtly influenced how monks experienced sleep and wakefulness. The soft, limited light didn't fully disrupt the body's sense of night, which meant that even while awake, they might still feel partially in a state of rest. It's like being awake, but not entirely. You shift slightly, your posture adjusting as your body tries to stay engaged. The candlelight dances, shadows moving gently across the room, and for a moment it feels almost dreamlike. Not in a dramatic, surreal way. More like that quiet, in-between state where your thoughts drift a little more freely. You glance around and notice that others seem to be experiencing something similar. A monk blinking slowly, his gaze soft. Another sitting very still, as if conserving energy. Someone else gently adjusting their position, trying to stay present. No one is fully asleep, but no one is fully awake either. It's a shared state, a kind of collective drowsiness that settles over the room like a thin, invisible layer. If modern offices had lighting like this, productivity would drop, but creativity might actually increase. Or everyone would just nap at their desks, possibly both. You try to focus on the task at hand, listening, reflecting, being present, but your mind keeps drifting back to the interplay between light and rest. Because it's not just about how long you sleep, it's about when. And here, when is constantly being adjusted, bent, rearranged. Historians are still debating how these patterns of interrupted sleep and nighttime activity affected the long-term health and alertness of monks. Some suggest that the segmented sleep pattern aligned, in part, with natural human tendencies before artificial lighting became widespread. Others argue that the demands of monastic schedules pushed those patterns further than what the body would naturally choose. Again, the truth likely sits somewhere in the middle. Like everything else here, balanced, negotiated, never entirely fixed. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently, trying to stay anchored. The warmth of the candles, the stillness of the room, it all combines into something almost soothing, dangerously soothing. Your head dips slightly, just a fraction, before you catch yourself and straighten again. Close one, You glance around, half expecting someone to notice, but everyone seems absorbed in their own quiet battle between alertness and rest. There's a kind of unspoken understanding in that. No judgment, just shared experience. And maybe that's what makes it manageable. Because you're not alone in this. No one here is. You're all moving through the same rhythm, feeling the same pull, this navigating the same tension between what's required and what's natural. The candlelight flickers again, and for a moment you imagine what it would be like to simply lie down here right now and let yourself drift. No bell, no schedule, just rest. It's a tempting thought, a very tempting thought, but it passes because the structure holds, the rhythm continues, and you continue with it. Eventually, the moment shifts, the activity in the room beginning to change, signaling that this segment is coming to an end. You feel a small sense of relief, not because it was difficult, but because staying awake in this environment feels like its own quiet achievement. You rise with the others, your movements slow but steady, and step back into the corridor. The air feels cooler again, sharper somehow, pulling you just a little more firmly into wakefulness. And then the bell. Yes, of course. Always the bell. It rings, steady and familiar, guiding everyone forward once more. You follow, your steps falling into place, your mind still carrying the soft glow of candlelight with it. Because now you understand something new. It's not just the schedule that shapes sleep. It's the light, the darkness, the subtle signals your body reads, even when you don't realize it. And here, those signals are constantly being rewritten, not completely, but just enough to keep you slightly off balance, slightly between states, slightly tired and somehow still moving forward anyway. Section 13. You continue along the corridor, your steps steady but your thoughts drifting in that familiar, gentle haze. By now, the rhythm of the monastery has settled into you, not comfortably, not completely, but enough that you no longer question every bell, every turn, every task. You simply follow. And yet your mind feels more curious than before, as if all this quiet repetition has created space for something else to surface. You're guided into a small room lined with wooden shelves, each holding carefully stacked manuscripts. The air here smells faintly of parchment and ink, a dry, almost dusty scent that feels strangely grounding. You sit and a text is placed before you, not for copying this time, but for reading, or at least attempting to read. Your eyes trace the lines slowly, the letters precise, deliberate, each one shaped by hands that likely felt just as tired as yours do now. You wonder, briefly, how many of these words were written by monks fighting the same quiet battle against sleep. Probably more than a few. As you turn a page, something catches your attention, not in the main text, but in the margin. A note. Small, almost hidden, written in a slightly different hand. You lean in a little closer. It's not dramatic, not poetic, just a brief comment. Something about the difficulty of maintaining the schedule, a quiet acknowledgement of fatigue, maybe even a subtle disagreement with how things are done. It feels personal. And suddenly the world of monastic life opens just a little wider. Because these manuscripts aren't just official texts, they're also records of real people. People who followed the rules, yes, but also thought about them, questioned them, struggled with them. You flip another page, another note. This one a bit lighter, almost humorous. Something about a brother who consistently struggled to stay awake during night prayers. The tone isn't harsh. If anything, it feels affectionate, like a quiet inside joke preserved in ink. You can't help but smile, just slightly, because it's such a human moment. Even here, in this structured, disciplined environment, there's room for personality, for observation, for a bit of gentle humor. It reminds you of how, even in the most serious workplaces, someone always finds a way to make a small joke in the margins, literally or otherwise. Some things, it seems, don't change. There's also a lesser-known detail that historians have uncovered. Medieval manuscripts sometimes contain marginalia, notes, doodles, comments that reveal aspects of daily life not always captured in official records. Tiny glimpses, fragments of experience. And among those fragments, references to fatigue, to schedules, to the challenges of maintaining focus appear more often than you might expect. Historians are still debating how representative these notes are. Do they reflect widespread sentiment, or just the thoughts of a few individuals who happen to have access to a quill and a moment of honesty? It's hard to say. But standing here now, feeling what you're feeling, it's not difficult to imagine that these thoughts were common. Because fatigue has a way of making people think, not always clearly, but honestly. You rest your hand lightly on the page, your eyes lingering on the ink. There's something comforting about knowing that centuries ago, someone else sat in a room like this, feeling the same heaviness, the same quiet resistance, the same need to just pause. And they wrote it down, not loudly, not boldly, just enough to leave a trace. You glance around the room, noticing how others read in silence, their expressions calm, their movements minimal. But now you see it differently. Behind that calm, there are thoughts, questions, maybe even small disagreements. Not rebellious, not disruptive, just present. You turn another page, and this time there's no note, just the text, clean and uninterrupted. It feels almost too perfect, too controlled. And somehow that makes the earlier notes stand out even more, because they break the pattern, just slightly, just enough to remind you that perfection is often edited. You sit back a little, your posture relaxing, your mind drifting again, not away from the experience, but deeper into it. You think about all the things you've seen today, the debates about naps, the adjustments for seasons, the quiet oversleeping, the subtle corrections, the hidden rests, and now the written traces of it all. It's like seeing both sides of a painting, the polished front and the rough, unfinished back. Both real, both necessary. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently, your body settling into the moment. The tiredness is still there, of course it is, but it feels different now. Less like an obstacle, more like a shared condition. Something that connects you to everyone else here, past and present. You close the manuscript carefully, placing your hand on the cover for just a moment, as if acknowledging the quiet voices within it. And then, the bell, always the bell. It rings, steady and familiar, pulling you back into motion once more. You stand, joining the others, your steps measured, your mind still carrying the weight and the warmth of what you've just seen. Because now you understand something new. The rules may define the structure, but it's the small, human details, the notes in the margins, that reveal what it actually feels like to live inside it. And in those details, you find something unexpectedly comforting. Because even here, in a world of discipline and routine, no one is perfectly awake all the time. Not even close. Section 14. You step out once more, the manuscript room fading behind you like a quiet thought that lingers just a little longer than expected. By now, the day feels stretched, not in a chaotic way, but in that slow, elastic sense where time keeps moving, yet your body insists it has already done enough. And yet, there is still more. You follow the others into a long, open passage where the air feels cooler again, brushing gently against your face as if trying politely to keep you awake. It's appreciated, somewhat effective. Briefly, your steps have changed. They're not rushed, not dragging, just steady in a way that suggests you've accepted your fate. If this were a modern setting, you'd probably describe it as running on autopilot, except here, there's no button to turn it off. You simply continue. But something is different now. The fatigue you felt earlier, sharp, noticeable, almost intrusive, has softened. It hasn't disappeared, not even close. But it's no longer something you're actively fighting every second. It's become background, a constant presence, like a quiet hum you eventually stop noticing. You glance around and realize you're not the only one. The monks move with a similar steadiness, not energetic, not exhausted to the point of collapse, just sustained. It's not the kind of endurance that comes from bursts of energy. It's the kind that comes from repetition, from adaptation, from slowly adjusting to a rhythm that at first felt impossible. There's a historical moment that reflects this reality in a broader sense. Many monastic communities, particularly during the High Middle Ages, became remarkably stable institutions. They maintained their routines, their schedules, their structures for years, sometimes centuries, without dramatic collapse. Which raises a quiet question. How? How did they sustain this life? Because from where you're standing, it feels demanding, relentless even. And yet, they continued, day after day, night after night. There's a lesser-known perspective that appears in some historical interpretations. Over time, monks didn't necessarily become less tired, but they became more accustomed to the pattern of tiredness itself. It became normal, expected, integrated. Historians are still debating how this long-term adaptation affected both physical and mental well-being. Some suggest that the body can adjust to segmented sleep patterns over time, developing a new baseline. Others argue that chronic fatigue may have remained a constant undercurrent, even if it was less frequently acknowledged. Again, the truth likely sits somewhere in between, because adaptation doesn't always mean comfort. Sometimes it just means familiarity. You take a slow breath, your chest rising and falling gently, and for a moment you stop trying to feel fully awake. Instead, you just feel present. And oddly enough, that helps. Because the struggle fades slightly when you stop measuring yourself against an ideal of perfect alertness. You're not fully rested, but you're here. You're moving. You're part of the rhythm. And maybe that's enough. You notice a monk nearby adjusting his sleeve, his movements small, precise, almost meditative. Another pauses briefly, looking out through a narrow window where light filters in softly. No one is rushing. No one is resisting. They're simply continuing. It's a different kind of energy. Not the sharp, high-alert focus you might be used to, more like a steady, quiet persistence. If modern life often feels like sprinting from one task to another, this feels like walking a very long path at a consistent pace. Not fast, but sustainable. At least, somewhat. You can't help but think back to earlier moments, the debates about naps, the quiet oversleeping, the subtle corrections, the hidden rests. All of it now makes more sense, because it's not just about rules, it's about survival within those rules. Small adjustments, unspoken understandings, ways of making the system work without breaking it. You shift your shoulders slightly, easing a bit of tension, and continue walking. The sound of your footsteps blends with the others, creating a soft, rhythmic pattern that feels almost calming. And then, as if the day itself is taking a gentle breath, there's a pause, not a long one. Just a moment where nothing is demanded of you. No task, no instruction, just space. You stand there, feeling it, letting it settle. And in that brief pause, something becomes clear. The fatigue hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer overwhelming. It's part of the experience now, integrated into it, like the bells, like the chants, like the cold stone floors. It's just there. And somehow that makes it easier to carry. You almost smile at the thought, just slightly, because it's such a quiet shift, but a meaningful one. You're not fighting the tiredness anymore. You're living with it, and that changes everything. Of course, the bell. Yes, always. It rings again, steady as ever, gently pulling the moment to a close. You take one last breath in that brief stillness, then step forward with the others as rejoining the flow without hesitation. Because now, you understand something that wasn't clear before. This life isn't about eliminating fatigue. It's about learning how to move through it, gracefully, quietly, together. And as you follow the sound of the bell once more, your steps feel just a little lighter. Not because you're less tired, but because you're no longer resisting it. You're simply continuing. And somehow, that feels like enough. Section 15. You follow the others one last time, though now your steps feel softer, almost weightless, as if the day has gently worn away the edges of effort. The monastery no longer feels unfamiliar. The corridors, the stone, the quiet rhythm of movement, it all feels known. Not easy, but known. The light has changed again. It's dimmer now, not quite dark, but fading, like the final moments before a candle is gently pinched out. Shadows stretch longer across the walls, and the air carries that subtle stillness that comes at the end of a long day, or what passes for a day here. Because time, as you've learned, doesn't quite behave the way you expect in this place. You move into the chapel once more, the space that has quietly anchored everything. The candles are lit again, their glow softer now, less insistent. The chanting begins, slower, lower, like a gentle exhale after something long and steady. You take your place, and for the first time, you don't resist the tiredness at all. It settles around you, not as something heavy, but as something calm, familiar, earned. You think back over everything you've experienced. The bells that divided the night into fragments, the strange rhythm of segmented sleep, the quiet debates about naps, whether they were weakness or wisdom, the careful rules shaped long ago, still guiding every movement, the seasons bending the schedule just slightly, the shared dormitory filled with soft breathing, and the occasional, very human snore, the gentle corrections when someone drifted out of rhythm, the absence of coffee, Still, honestly, the most shocking part: the differences between monasteries, each interpreting the balance in its own way. The hidden naps, tucked into quiet corners, the candlelight reshaping your sense of time, the notes in the margins revealing thoughts no one said aloud, the slow, quiet adaptation to a life that once felt impossible. All of it, layered, connected, human. There's a historical truth that sits quietly beneath all of this. Monastic life endured not because it was easy, but because it found ways, small, subtle, often unspoken ways, to work with human limits rather than against them completely. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but persistently. Historians are still debating how sustainable these rhythms truly were over long periods. Some suggest that the structure provided stability and purpose that balanced the physical demands. Others point to the ongoing presence of fatigue as an unavoidable reality. And maybe both are true. Because standing here now, you understand something that doesn't quite fit into a single explanation. It's not about solving the tension between rest and discipline. It's about living inside it. You close your eyes briefly, not falling asleep while just resting them. And when you open them again, the candlelight feels softer, the room quieter, as if everything has gently slowed. The chanting continues, but it no longer feels like something you have to keep up with. It feels like something you can simply be part of. Your breathing matches the rhythm, your thoughts drift more slowly. Even the tiredness feels different. Not a problem to fix, not a weakness to resist, just a quiet presence. You realize, almost without thinking, that this is what the monks were navigating all along. Not the perfect schedule, not the perfect balance, but the ongoing, gentle adjustment between what is asked of them and what they can give. Sometimes that meant following the rule exactly. Sometimes it meant bending it just a little. Sometimes it meant accepting that you're tired and continuing anyway. And sometimes it meant resting, even if only for a moment, even if no one ever wrote it down. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently, your body settling fully now. The bell doesn't ring immediately. For once, there's a pause, a real one. And in that pause, everything feels still, not empty, just quiet. Your shoulders relax, your thoughts soften. The edges of the day begin to blur, not disappearing, but fading into something less defined. You no longer track the schedule. You no longer anticipate the next bell. You simply exist in this moment where nothing is being demanded of you. And that, after everything, feels like a kind of rest, a different kind. Not sleep, but close enough. The candles flicker gently, their light growing softer, shadows deepening in the corners of the room. The chanting slows, then gradually fades, leaving behind a silence that feels full and warm. You let your eyes close again, this time just a little longer. Your breathing becomes slower, steadier, each inhale and exhale blending into the next. The stone beneath you no longer feels cold. The air no longer feels sharp. Everything softens. You drift not into sleep exactly, but into something just beside it. A quiet space, a gentle in-between, where the day releases you piece by piece and you let it. No resistance, no effort, just release. The last sounds fade, the last quiet, and in their place there is only stillness, a calm, steady, unbroken stillness. You rest there, and slowly, gently, you let go. The night settles in, soft and patient, wrapping everything in a calm that asks nothing more of you. There are no more bells to follow, no more steps to take, no more questions to answer. Just quiet, just rest. Your breathing remains slow, even like a soft rhythm that continues without needing your attention. The world around you fades, not disappearing, but becoming distant, like something seen through a gentle fog. Safe, still, unhurried. If thoughts come, they pass quietly, like clouds drifting across a wide open sky. Nothing holds, nothing presses, everything simply moves on. You don't need to stay awake, you don't need to try. There's nothing left to follow, nothing left to do. Only this calm, only this moment. And as it deepens, as it softens even further, you feel yourself drifting more fully now, the line between wakefulness and sleep gently dissolving. There's no rush, no expectation, just a quiet invitation to rest, and you accept it, slowly, easily, completely. Open quote, open quote, open quote, end of script. Sweet dreams, close quote, close quote, close quote.